Christianity developed in the province of Judea out of Jewish tradition in the 1st century CE after Jesus' resurrection. For the first 3 centuries, it was more of an oral tradition, a sect of Judaism that followed the law and believed in the teachings of Jesus Christ. It then developed further through the Roman Empire and eventually became its official religion through the Constantine the Great, the Roman Emperor. It started first based on the teachings of Jesus and later on the writings and missionary work of the Apostle Paul. After Jesus' death, the Apostle Paul wrote many letters that are now part of the New Testament and the Christian Bible, and on which Christianity is mainly based on. Paul was a Roman citizen and sent those letters to small communities of Christians living throughout the Roman Empire. The letters involved issues related to the exact relationship between Judaism and Christianity, relationship to the law and traditions. Although Christianity developed out of the Jewish tradition, it had no such legal protections. Judaism received the status of a legal religion in the Roman Empire with formal protections, whereas Christians were occasionally persecuted and formally punished for their beliefs during the first 2 centuries. This has changed with the Roman Empire. After accepting Christianity as their main religion, the Roman Empire started changing and transitioning religion into what we now know as Roman Catholicism. Historically, religion was always part of any political movement and often used as a political weapon. The cooperation of church and state meant that religious systems were shaped based on the political and cultural needs, where church and state were working together and enforcing political and religious laws. Faith was not only your personal choice, but part of your nationality and how culture was shaped in particular demographic. It turned into this religiosity, a degree of religiousness that an individual or society exhibited, measured through a combination of factors like belief, practice, politics, and belonging. In other words, church had a huge power and they wanted to keep it that way. Religion wasn't about the faith that comes out of your heart, but more part of political movement and nationality. However, the church wanted to paint a particular narrative that would bring people to the church and keep them there, attached to the church, out of fear of losing salvation. To make people dependent of the church, and that the church would be the only way to God and salvation. That fear kept people closely attached to the system. However, the church also manipulated some stories and painted a different picture about the role of the disciples of Jesus Christ, and in particular, about Mary Magdalene. If you ask any random person what they know about Mary Magdalene, they will say that she was a prostitute. That's it. That label attached to her has no basis in the Bible. In reality, the Bible never states that she was a prostitute, but a sinner committing adultery. Much speculations emerged over the century whether she was one or not. In my other video, I explored the idea that prostitution was considered immoral, however not punishable by death penalty, but rather adultery was. In the Gospels we find out she was a sinner about to be persecuted. However, later the church attached the label of a prostitute to her. In the Gospel of John, we learn that a woman was caught in adultery, which people automatically assumed must have been prostitution. This could have been an affair involving sexual act with a married man, which was considered a crime and violation of a marriage covenant and punishable by death. However, prostitution was considered immoral, but generally not a criminal offense. In the Gospel of John, we know that the woman was facing persecution by death, and Jesus redeemed her. Therefore, I exclude the fact that she was a prostitute, but possibly having an affair with a married man. However, the label stayed, and the opinion about Mary Magdalene shaped the opinion for many people that even any new information would not remove that stain. The story of Mary is veiled with a lot of mystery and secrecy, as if the church wanted to paint her in a bad light and remove her from the group of disciples completely. However, due to her presence in the most important events of Jesus, which was crucifixion and resurrection, the church couldn't completely remove her, but gave her new identity. What we know is that Mary was possibly a sinner that made a mistake, which, to be honest, is the case for a lot of people. And she was rescued by Jesus and decided to dedicate her life to follow Jesus and his movement. She was with Jesus and his disciples in most of their journeys, town visits, but most importantly, she was the only witness from Jesus' disciples to see crucifixion, and the first one Jesus appeared to after resurrection. This gives Mary a lot of credibility to rival the other disciples. She was also considered as an apostle to the apostles, the first one that spread the good news of the gospel. However, that title was quickly taken from her due to the past and the fact she was a woman. In other texts that did not make their way into the canonical Bible, a discovery in Nag Hammadi text, Mary appears as a prominent disciple of Jesus, not as a silent, repentant woman pictured in Synoptic Gospel. In passage where Jesus is in a discussion with his disciples, Mary Magdalene asks many informed questions, whereas the other disciples at times seem confused. She is the one who understands spiritual teachings more than male disciples. She is the woman with spiritual knowledge and understanding beyond the surface level. She is also depicted in the other text as a female counterpart to Jesus, as a mature soul that could teach other disciples. And that is why Jesus also appears to her first and wants her to carry on his message. Unfortunately, Mary lived in times where women's roles were quite diminished, particularly when it comes to legal rights as a witness. In the first century of Jewish and Roman societies, a woman's testimony was generally not accepted as legally valid in court and seen as less credible due to the cultural views on their levity or boldness. This context makes the gospel accounts of women being witnesses to the crucifixion or resurrection very significant, because it was viewed as an embarrassment or unlike choice for mythmakers, questioning their historical accuracy. This was due to the cultural norms, and any female claims would initially face disbelief. According to the Jewish law, women are not valid witnesses, as it states in the Mishnah. These laws were practiced by the Jewish community, therefore it would be logical to say that women were excluded from any events where they could be treated as witnesses. The oath of testimony is conducted with men and not women. Shevot 4 verse 1. From the Josephus books, the historian stated, "From women let no evidence be accepted, because of the levity and temerity of their sex." From the Antiquus. Moreover, writers would likely have used more credible male witnesses to persuade the audience, not women writers, whose words were already devalued, says the Gospel Coalition. Early critics like Celsus mocked the idea, calling Mary Magdalene a hysterical female, which further underscored the unconventional nature of women as primary witnesses, according to the Gospel Coalition. We also see in the teachings of the Apostle Paul and Timothy that, "Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence." 1 Timothy 2 verse 11 to 12. Therefore, according to the Jewish law, Mary could not exercise the role of a reliable witness to the crucifixion or resurrection, and the matter had to be examined by males. This is also why Peter joined Mary to examine the tomb, even though the first reaction from the disciples was disbelief. The role of Mary in early Christianity as a spiritual teacher and having spiritual knowledge was a challenge to the institution of the Church. Her persona was a confirmation that women can in fact possess spiritual knowledge and do not need men or institutions for their soul development and salvation. That is why Church decided to paint a new picture of Mary Magdalene, a reformed prostitute and submissive and uninformed woman unable to make the right decisions in life. Mary was pushed aside, trampled by people's opinions, and her role was taken away from her. In reality, Christianity was hijacked by first their male disciples, who wanted to go with their understanding that sounded safer, rather than go with something that they still did not understand fully. However, this has also been hijacked from Peter, who was considered to be the rock upon which Jesus wanted to build his church. Paul took the message to even more different direction, mirroring his philosophical understanding of the resurrection that was coming from his Greek educational system. The result was that the gospel changed its meaning completely, and Paul became its prominent founder. Christian doctrine and theology among the Gentiles was established through the letters to Romans that were widely regarded as Paul's most systematic and comprehensive presentation of the Christian gospel and its theological implications. It has been called the Cathedral of Christian Doctrine and the Constitution of Christianity due to its foundational role in shaping Christian thought. In reality, the doctrine of the Apostle Paul was much more beneficial to the churches. It wasn't about the truth, but about the power. Church was viewed as the only way to salvation, priests as the messengers of God that could only interpret the Bible, and faith as part of political integration. Losing belonging to the church meant losing salvation. This fear of unknown kept people attached to institutions that would shape their understanding about the faith, God, and salvation. It felt almost impossible to leave the church, and those who did were deemed and ostracized from the society. However, the church didn't share its all knowledge with the people. We know that the Vatican is wrapped in a lot of secrecy, and there are a lot of texts that were kept from going into the public, or if they did, they were automatically labeled as non-true, legends, and heresy. That automatic label shaped people's biases and enabled people to even explore those texts and shape their own opinions about it. That is why the story about Mary Magdalene being a prominent disciple and someone who had a lot of spiritual knowledge was a real problem to the church. She understood Jesus' teachings on the nature of matter and spirit and the path to transcend the earthly desires. Her knowledge of inner ascent and freedom from earthly traps that kept people bound and in cycles was too liberating to the church, who was looking to keep people bound to the institution and to tie on a weekly basis. The church took a deliberate attempt to undermine her spiritual standing by branding her text as heretical, mystical, and forged texts that were not true. It revealed its patriarchal authority and power struggles. This emphasis of inner knowledge that was coming from Mary's text over external rituals and hierarchical systems was a direct threat to developing institutional church. It would remove the need for churches, priests, rituals, and traditions that were so prominent in the church community. In other words, Mary's text would remove the need for any religious institutions, which of course churches didn't want to happen. The church tricked Mary by changing her story and repainting her identity, giving her a small and insignificant role of the repentant prostitute. However, the lack of information about Mary kept the interest about her growing. After all, she was the witness to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Mary was in large way destroyed, and therefore it wasn't possible to include her text into canonical Bible. However, the Church unknowingly included her text into the canon, and this is how Mary tricked the Church. As I mentioned before, according to the Jewish law, women were not valid witnesses, as it states in the Mishnah. A woman's testimony was generally not accepted as legally valid in court and seen as less credible due to the cultural views of their sex. This was due to cultural norms, and any female claims would initially face disbelief. Moreover, writers would likely have used more credible male witnesses to persuade the audience, not women writers, whose words were already devalued. Mary was of course aware of that. However, Mary was the only credible witness to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection from Jesus' disciples. When Jesus appeared to Mary, Peter was already gone and could not confirm that Jesus really resurrected. He only saw an empty tomb. Later we read that Jesus appeared to the other disciples and they could confirm the resurrection. However, the initial moment of resurrection and the event of crucifixion was very crucial to the Christian movement. Without the real knowledge of what actually happened, the movement would have no factual basis of really existing. Therefore, it would have been helpful to have a witness testimony of what actually happened. And this is where Mary comes in. The Gospel of John is the only Gospel with a real eyewitness testimony. However, the author has been changed to appear as a male. This was deliberately done to make it more believable coming from a male witness. Otherwise, it would have been destroyed straight away and not accepted in canonical Bible. The question of who was the real author has been a mystery for nearly 2,000 years, and what we only knew was the fact that it was written by the beloved disciple. In my other video, I went through the analysis that this was in fact Mary Magdalene, making her the author of the Gospel of John. Moreover, what we know about the author of the Gospel of John is that the author witnessed crucifixion, and the chapter 19 of the Gospel of John is a testimony of an eyewitness who testified of the things he saw. How do we know the author was a witness to the crucifixion? And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth so that you might believe. John 19, verse 35. The author highlights that he who has seen and he testified, and finally, his testimony is true. Therefore, we have a strong statement here. This was an eyewitness who testified and is telling the truth. We also know that all scriptural and historical evidence presents the fact that during crucifixion, only women were present. All male disciples fled before crucifixion due to the various persecutions that were happening. We read, "Then everyone deserted him and fled." Mark 14, verse 50. But this has taken all place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Matthew 26, verse 56. Therefore, injecting any male into the witnesses during crucifixion has no scriptural basis, but these are just assumptions. If we go only with the evidence, all four Gospels agree that it was witnessed by Mary Magdalene, therefore she was the only reliable name from Jesus' disciples. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the Younger and Joseph, and Salome. Mark 15, verse 40. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. John 19, verse 25. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to carry for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and mother of Zebedee's sons. Matthew 27, verse 55. We also have another confirmation that the author was a witness, a disciple, and the author of the Gospel, which we can treat as a testimony. This is the disciple who testifies of these things and wrote these things, and we note that his testimony is true. John 21, verse 24. The Gospel of John was written by not only an eyewitness of the crucifixion, but also Jesus' disciple, someone from the close circle of Jesus who was present during many teachings, journeys, and crucial events. And that person wrote those things. Therefore, the author is claiming that it was his work, not of a third party involved. I've heard one objection of the verse being written in a third party, therefore this couldn't have been written by Mary. However, this was done deliberately to confuse and not point directly to Mary, because as I mentioned, otherwise it would have been destroyed and not believed. Moreover, when you are a witness to a crime and you give your testimony, that would most likely be written by police or detective, that will also be written in the third person as he has seen, not I have seen. This does not take away from the fact that this was a testimony of an eyewitness. Therefore, from this we see that Mary Magdalene could not write the Gospel of John openly as Mary. That Gospel would have been destroyed straight away because according to the Jewish law, women had no say. I hope you can see why Mary changed her identity as an author, yet it was very important for her to write it regardless. Mary was the only one who understood deeper spiritual messages, but also portrayed it in a very simple and easy to understand manner. It was very important that she hid her identity as an author, because that gospel would have been destroyed straight away. And only in times we live now we can entertain this idea and accept it as a fact that this was in fact Mary Magdalene who was the author of the Gospel according to John. In the Gospel of John we see that Jesus had emotions like weeping, love towards disciples, love towards a woman, which gives us a better understanding that even though he was presented as a divine Son of God, he was also very human, having all those emotions and feeling pain during crucifixion. We don't have this from other Gospels, which makes the Gospel of John even more special and different. The other synoptic Gospel is more factual, even orientated, presenting Jesus as a teacher. However, the Gospel of John is more emotional, presenting Jesus as divine being, the Son of God who was having a human experience. This Gospel was written from a woman's perspective, Mary Magdalene's perspective, and Mary was the only one who witnessed crucifixion and resurrection. Therefore, the Gospel of John is an actual witness testimony.